All right, welcome. We'll call this meeting to order. This is the Kaysville City Planning Commission, February 13th, 2025. First item of order, declaration of conflict of interest of any of the commissioners. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
on the matter with America First, I have a conflict there and would withdraw from that.
Very good. We will then move into that item number 3 on the agenda, conditional use permit for an EMC sign for America First Credit Union located at 1302 West, 200 North. Now, we do have 2 agenda items. From my reading, it looked like they're both basically the same information. We'll have to vote on them separately, but I guess kind of assume the same information for both, so.
That's correct.
All right, take it away.
All right, agenda item 3 is a conditional use permit for electronic message sign. The intent is to replace the existing signage on site. Currently, it's just a static monument sign, and this would replace it with an EMC sign. This agenda item would be installed on the Flint side. So because the property is located on the corner of Flint and 200 North, we added the distinction between the two into the staff report. So this would be on the Flint side. The sign meets all of our standards for size and zoning, and staff isn't proposing any additional conditions for the sign, but because it is an electronic message sign, it is considered a conditional use. Therefore, we brought it here to Planning Commission, and the slide you see here, you'll see the same slide for the second sign. Like I said, they are identical, and I believe, I don't know if Eric Cheney is here today with America First. He's here and available. Yes, go. He's here and available to answer any questions from the Planning Commission, but staff is recommending approval of this sign according to the provisions found in 1733 sign regulations.
Very good. Do we want to hear from the applicant at all? Is there any need for that? Any questions that we have?
I have a question. I have a question about the sign. Yeah.
If you come up, state your name and.
Eric Cheney with Yesco.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
My name's Paul.
Nice to meet you.
And you're with Yesco?
That's correct.
Oh, man, I worked with Yesco for 30 years on different stuff. I used to work for cities, so.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Kirk Brimley was a good friend of mine, if you knew Kirk. Did you know Kirk?
So I didn't know him, but I know the name.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Anyway,
Very cool.
great guy. Question about the brightness on the sign. And do you have a color spectrum that you're using?
So the electronics, full transparency, America First provides their own electronics.
Okay.
And then we integrate it into the message center itself.
Okay.
So I do have a spec sheet on that. But it's a pretty typical sign electronics that you see everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, they can control the brightness, they can control all of that. So.
Yeah, I'm very sensitive as a former planner to the color spectrum. And usually what we'd like to see is anything under 4,000, under 4K.
Okay.
Would you have any idea what your sign is, or is that even applicable here? Is it applicable?
It should be, yeah. So are you just talking in terms of the message center or the rest of the LED lighting?
Well, I guess probably the message center more than anything else. But
Right.
do you know? Because it'd be nice if that were a warmer white instead of a colder. But I don't know. It's not a big deal. If it were gas canopy, you'd understand going over 4.
Sure.
But for especially evening lighting, it's nice to be under that 4 and closer down to 2700, so that's a pretty warm white.
Yeah.
I'm
that's-
just geeking out here because
Yeah,
this is
no, no,
what I
no.
used to do, and so I'm just curious.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm gonna say you can't do whatever,
Sure,
just
sure.
curious if you know.
It is more, like you said, in terms of the product that we're providing for the LEDs. As for the message center, I do have a spec sheet that he provided me, and I can look into that, but I don't know, because we're not the manufacturer of the,
Yeah.
of the electronics.
Nope, no
We're not
problem.
even- We're not even providing them, we're just integrating
Okay.
it, so,
Okay. It's probably not that relevant. I'm just curious more than anything else.
yeah, no, great question.
I wish more cities would incorporate that color spectrum
Mm-hmm.
type light on types of signs.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree.
They're often just way too bright.
Yeah, yeah. And there's nothing more detracting than if
Yeah.
it's too bright.
Right.
Yeah.
So is the entire sign electronic or just the message center?
Just the message, do you happen to have the print?
I've got a,
Oh, yeah, so you can see the square, so if you look at the rendering, the conceptual view, the bottom right picture, here,
Yeah.
I've got a bigger blown up one. So, the message center is this picture right here.
Right.
And then this is static, this will be routed out push through plex that you see
Yeah.
pretty much everywhere, so, yeah.
So it's all like illuminated. Currently, it's just illuminated, but it's,
Uh-huh, so you'll
but
see
there's
the-
nothing moving and no changeable things.
No, so there shouldn't be motion, yeah.
currently.
So,
Okay.
yeah, then that's the way that we've discussed it with America First. So there shouldn't be video, there shouldn't be motion, it should be static images that rotate.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you could see the night rendering up here. So the top cap will have an illuminated glow down, and then everything that's white, basically. So the America First and the Credit Union, and then the other letters. These won't, these are just vinyl, the bars and the small copy, so.
Okay. Is there anything in, like, is there anything in the code as far as these EMC signs that says it can or can't be like moving or,
Yeah, we've got, I think this is,
Yeah, top of the second page.
it's part of something
Okay.
39.9.
There's no chasing
No
or
rapid
blinking, no chasing or
There
blinking,
shouldn't
right?
be, No,
Flashing,
no.
okay.
yeah.
That-
So it's just general display, changes of
Stills.
display.
Yep, it should see as you see on like a billboard that you're driving down the freeway.
Yeah, where they're on that.
Is a still every 8 seconds, you know, they could flip a
Yeah,
still.
yeah.
And if you wanted to change the timing, I'm sure America First would be
Nah.
open to 15 seconds or 30, you know, whatever you want, so.
Yeah.
No.
That's
Not
nice. I
concerned.
mean, that's nicer than what I had kind of maybe in my mind, which is just overstimulation in the city. It's not very peaceful when things
Yeah.
are just buzzing and,
If it's too bright, if it's motion, it's, yeah,
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
takes your eyes off the road.
yeah, the brightness makes a
Yes.
difference. I mean, the temperature and the brightness, so.
It
Right.
really does, Aaron. Those are good questions. That's why I asked, because I worked on some sign codes for a couple of cities, and we were very sensitive about movement and brightness. If they just change, slowly,
Yeah.
every 8, 10 seconds,
Yeah,
it's not a problem.
no, yeah.
It's just when you have one of those, really bad ones that just
Yeah.
really bright.
And the problem that comes from that is people that buy kind of a lower quality message center that doesn't have the control and that doesn't have easy controls, and so they have a lot of those problems where it's too bright, they can't control the brightness.
Yeah.
They have things that glitch and stuff, but that
Okay.
stuff should, if it goes out, it should shut the whole thing off and
Yeah.
go black if it's having problems. So.
Well, thank you for your
Yeah, absolutely.
responses.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
I love our scientific terms in the code. Rapid blinking, intensely bright.
exactly what they're talking about.
Sure. And we all agree on it.
Yeah, right. Everybody knows what rapid means.
Linda, could you just scroll back down to just see what, right there where it says what we should be considering? Hours of operation, sign height, sign size, setbacks. And imagine you've taken a look at all of that. Any concerns on any of those?
No, as far as, the surrounding uses and where the sign is proposed, I believe it's general commercial across the street, and then for the other sign, it's residential properties, but there isn't any reason to believe that it would be bright enough to cause any kind of nuisance.
Okay. Yeah, I guess you were here when we heard the concerns about the car wash. Intense, oh, you weren't here. There were concerns about the intensity of the brightness of the car wash signs, so I guess we want to make sure we don't do that again.
Right, and it is limited. We don't have any specific illumination standards
Yeah,
as far
right.
as a specific number in our code, which is a limitation on what we can regulate, but
Yeah.
that is something definitely to consider.
Okay.
All right, what are we thinking? Any other?
Was there any public comment or anything?
No, we didn't receive any
emails or
phone calls or comments on this application.
This wasn't posted, was it, on site?
It was,
Oh,
we
was
posted
it?
a sign, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was, we did put our normal A-frame sign out on site. There was some confusion with the staff for the credit union. They took it down. They thought it was mistakenly placed there, but it got put back up, I think, the same day. So it may have been down for a period of time, but I think it was the same day. It was taken down, I think, on a Saturday.
And there's no residential that directly faces it? Or there is?
There is,
To the
Lint.
east.
On the other side.
Oh, on the east side, yeah, okay. Well, as long as the light's low. Do you guys have a provision for dimming the intensity of the light? Oh, you don't know because you didn't make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I can ask them, but yeah, they should.
I think that would be a reasonable condition to attach for an approval, is to just after, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, that you just reduce the lumens or the foot candles, whichever measure they're using, to reduce that.
Well, it
Especially
looks
'cause you're
like-
driving at
It
night.
looks like that's required for the code. Am I reading that right, Melinda?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it
I think it's
has
worth
to
pointing
be
out, though.
automatic programmed to automatically dim to the light conditions.
Yeah, many of them do automatically dim down. They have a sensitive controls that. So I can check with them, but they should have that.
Good. That's ideal.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Are we ready for a motion? Is there any other concerns?
I'll make a motion.
Very good.
I motion that we approve the conditional use permit for the America First Credit Union Electronic Message Center sign, which is a conditional use in the zone. And it would, based on the staff report findings and their recommendation, and it looks as though the code covers the concerns based on our discussion, I would add nothing else to that, just simply approve per the findings in the staff report. But I'd welcome any input on the motion.
Paul, would you be willing to put in your motion just a stipulation that it be programmed to dim after, like, say, an hour after sunset or something like that?
Absolutely, yes. Okay, well, yeah, so moved, right? Or wait, I need a second on the motion. I'm happy to accept the amendment.
I'll second it
Okay,
with that addition.
yep.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comments on that? All right, we'll start the voting down here.
Aye.
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 I believe
Paul,
he's
you're up.
abstaining.
I abstain.
Oh, that's right, he's abstaining. Aye.
All right, motion passes. Now we got to do the same thing again for agenda item number 4. This sign is on the 200 north side of the property.
What's different about this one?
Essentially nothing except the location.
Motion to approve.
Second? Same as the first?
Yes, motion to approve based on the motion made before on the similar sign on the other frontage with the condition added to have the sign intensity dim 1 hour after sunset year-round.
Okay, we have a motion, and I believe we had a second.
Yeah, second.
All right.
Aye.
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 Abstain?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 5, a public hearing for consideration of enacting Kaysville City Code Title 17, Chapter 31-5, farm stands, and amending the following titles, et cetera, et cetera. Details. I don't want to read the whole thing.
Thank you, Chair. So as just kind of a prelude, the structure of this portion is going to be a little different from normal, as there are a couple of discussion points I want to hit as far as this text amendment goes and get your guys' feedback and questions and concerns. But as just kind of an introduction, this is a text amendment proposing we add an additional chapter to 31, Title 17, Chapter 31, to allow for farm stands as a temporary use. And so moving on to the next slide, the first of the kind of major discussion points that I'd like to hit is what we're calling the definition of whether the products that would be sold in this farm stand would be required to be produced entirely on site, or if they would be allowed to be grown elsewhere in the city and then sold from this farm stand. So we're formatting it in terms of option A and option B to provide both in kind of comparison. And for each of the discussion points, the options come from both discussion internally with staff and with the applicant as far as what would be most prudent in terms of the ordinance. So as far as on-site versus external goes, staff recommendation would be to limit it to primarily on-site rather than off-site within the city. But I'd welcome any questions or discussion from the commission.
I have a question. How would we know whether or not it's being grown on site?
That is one of the concerns, but one of the other provisions we did put in the ordinance requires that the farm stand be operated by the legal owner of the site where the products are produced. Beyond that, it would be an enforcement issue. And we'll get to this later, but we're suggesting it as a conditional use, so it would come to Planning Commission as a conditional use, and it would go through that process. And in theory, if there were issues, it would come back to us as an enforcement issue. But beyond what we're proposing here, there's limitations on how much we could ensure that, I guess.
Okay, that's the reason I asked that is because I've dealt with it two different ways. If somebody has a substantially large site, you can be somewhat assured that they're producing at least a good portion of it. Because, businesses may complain about, grocery stores may say, hey, I don't want to compete with the guy who's bringing his stuff in from, Willard, Fruitway up there. But I did work in a community where we specifically allowed a well-known fruit stand that you see all over the place, and they were allowed to bring in stuff from their farm. So they owned the property and the farm, but it wasn't in the city where they were setting up the stands. And what they did was very creative. They went to each of the cities and said, look, we are farmers. We are Utah-based. Our farm is in Willard, that area between Brigham City and North Ogden. And everywhere they went, the cities would ask the same question, well, what about our, and they'd say, well, we're just temporary. We're only here for a few weeks, and people want to buy stuff they know is grown in state. And so it was kind of an honor, on your honor thing. But in the end, I switched my planning, my planning perspective from it had to be grown on site, because I realized there's no way for us to respond to a complaint from somebody in the community saying, hey, I know they're not growing those rutabagas on site or whatever it is they're selling, right? So because it was temporary, we realized it's limited in time. And so therefore, we're like, you know what, there's no way for us to know. So we just said, we're not going to try to spend resources on that, but we're okay with the temporary fruit stand. So that's just a perspective of one side. I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's just my experience and that's my opinion.
Commissioner, may I ask, was that in context of locations in commercial areas or residential?
It was in commercial only.
Yeah, so the distinction here would be that this is being proposed to be allowed in residential areas. And so,
Only?
Well, agricultural and residential.
Okay.
Which is, I think, the reason why we are proposing the limitation of having that be on site so that the impact to the neighborhood is reasonably minimal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I was going to ask the question because we do have like that farm stand that's just south of Big O.
Yeah,
Tire
and
here,
that's
in
zoned
a
commercial.
commercial zone,
Mhm.
right? And that's why that would be, and I mean,
And
that's
retail,
certainly not
and
grown
retail
on
sales
site.
are allowed, right? This is essentially allowing retail sales in a residential area.
Yeah.
Can I just respond a little bit more to your question? Because it's a great question. So in Sandy City, back in the 80s, they still had a lot of ground. Sandy City was not built out like it is now. And there were tons of farm fields, cows, horses. And so it was like a perfect little city, had a little bit of everything. But it had some real working farms. But we had, you know, a guy who set up his farm stand, and one of the local grocers, who will remain nameless, said, hey, I know he's not growing those on site. Turned into a real mess. So what happened, what the upshot was, we didn't solve the question of whether or not it was appropriate or inappropriate to sell homegrown fruit on your property. It became a matter of traffic safety. So what the city did was they said, we don't think in Sandy City that it is appropriate to sell in a residential area because they don't have parking and turnaround and width on the road. So the city was able to say, you can do it as a conditional use if you're going to bring us a little site plan for your conditional use permit or for your over-the-counter approval, but you got to show how you're going to mitigate any potential hazard, because what was happening, people would see that sign for corn or peaches or whatever, and they'd pull off the road, and they set up their stand where? On the shoulder, right? So just beyond the right-of-way or even in the right-of-way, they would set their stand up and people would pull off and their car was practically in the travel lane. Then they swing their door out and they jump out. Now you got a public safety problem. So it became less a matter of what was being grown or you know, the fact of it was being sold in a residential area, but they specifically said, you can't do it in a residential area unless you've got really good public safety. It's got to be back off the road in your drive. You can have a sign out by the road, but you can't have the stand out there within a certain distance of the asphalt. So that's one way of looking at it. So in Holiday, what we had was this well-known farm that said, we want to be in your commercial areas in particular, and they had to get permission from the property owner, the commercial property owner, and then they could only do it if they were in an area that had curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and, you know, a place to park. And we said it was okay. There's no perfect answer here, but these are questions, practical questions we got to think about.
I don't,
So Paul, this ordinance, it requires a site plan to be submitted so that there is the opportunity to take a look at how they're proposing to set it up.
Yep.
And then it also does say that any street parking, on-street parking shall comply with existing regulations of the city, and that the operation shall not impede safe traffic circulation.
Good.
And I guess that could be reviewed at the time the site plan's submitted and.
That can
thought
just be
about
over the
and
counter, you know, I
Yeah.
don't think that needs to come to PC. But that is a concern that I think, you know, if it's answered here, then great. That's smart. Maybe it was Sandy way back in the day that actually influenced this, huh? It was a big deal.
Thank you. I appreciate the augment that was done to this since the first draft was sent out. And it addressed what I thought was the first gaping issue was I like the 180 days. Gives some definition to seasonality and operating hours. A moment ago on the screen you had, thank you, this can I see the inside, outside? I'm aware of a stand on Main Street where I've been a patron, and they sell produce from their lot and from their relatives' lots in Kaysville. So that's extant, that's going on.
Down north?
Excuse me?
Is this the one on north end of town?
I'm just across the street from Davis High School, roughly.
Oh, it's down there.
And so it looked like you had two options drafted, someone, thank you.
Yes.
Just skimming what you wrote, in a strange way, option B gives more control, because now we're not having products shipped from other municipalities, like, hey, I see you have a farm stand, can I sell my widgets at your farm stand from another community? I just bring that up because I'm aware option B has already occurred within our city.
So to just add a little bit more context to the discussion that we had with the applicant, she's okay with the restriction of having this to be produced or grown on site. She also sits on the board for, I'm gonna probably not say this correctly, but the Utah Cut Flower Farm Association. And so because of that, she has contacts in other parts of the city as well as the state. And so the forward thinking that she had with including other sites in this was that while she may or may not want to do that at this point, there would be others that she knows that have expressed interest that would maybe not want to have a farm stand on their own property, but sell their flowers to her for her to sell.
Yeah.
And currently, that is not something that we allow.
Yeah, option B
To
would
have
allow-
a residential home essentially serving as a wholesaler. There's precedent set for that, and so we just wanted to make sure we had that discussion of, does allowing bringing in items grown or produced off-site create a scale that might be too impactful for a
Great, yeah, I
neighborhood?
could have a greenhouse elsewhere in Kaysville and a stand where I sell flowers. And I have a garden next to my home. So, yes, it does open the door for scale. And maybe that's not desirable.
I would like to just share kind of another thought about this is, as far as this concerns on scale, I think those impacts really are what we're talking about with safety and traffic. Other than that, I think it is a fabulous opportunity for people to have other, more access to fresh local food, which is a wellness issue. It is just I think that'd be a blessing. If I had a neighbor who had access to, a farm and could sell fresh eggs or fresh produce in a safe way, I would welcome that as a neighbor. I think that would be fabulous. Fresh flowers or eggs, and scale is only a problem as far as safety is concerned. If that's addressed, I would be more for option B
Yeah.
than A.
I'd welcome anybody who sells eggs right now.
Yes.
You can't see the eggs by themselves.
I agree with you. I think I favor option B as well.
Mr. Chairman, is the applicant here?
Yeah, I think we kind of missed the opportunity to have the applicant share with us. We just dove right in, so please come up and we'd love to hear your perspective.
Okay, my name's Britton Van Brocklin with Cherry Petals Flower Farm. So yes, I've been wanting a farm stand forever, but legally you can't in Kaysville in a residential area. So we put together this text amendment. I'm very grateful to all the staff. So my thought process on the allowing people to grow also in Kaysville came from my friend who's also a flower farmer, and she grows on her site and she also grows on her neighbor's site that's like an old lady and can't really garden anymore, so she also gardens in her farm. And so my thought was like, if my cute friend wanted to set up a farm stand and make a bouquet, like how would she be able to make a bouquet with, like, would she have to be like, I can't make it with the stuff I grew on my neighbor's yard? And that was kind of my thought process there. I don't really want to sell her stuff on my stand. I only want it to be stuff I grow for my farm stand. So that was my thought process on that, on-site versus external.
And I would say that's probably pretty specific to what you want to sell, because you want to do your flowers, right?
Right. And like maybe tomatoes and, you know, like depending on what excess I have. But my main farm is a flower farm. So. But I think it's awesome to like allow this for other farmers. I mean, the purpose of this whole text amendment is encourage urban farming, which micro farms are like the largest growing farms in the U.S. right now, which is anything under 5 acres. So
I think it's a great idea.
Me too. I like the idea a lot, and I do like option B, as we talked about, allowing, you know, not just from on that site, but anywhere in Kaysville where somebody's growing stuff.
oops.
If I can just drill down just a little bit more on option B, which we did with our discussion, we did kind of like the thought of the synergy that would be created within Kaysville. But we've also included an option to have packaged foods sold per the cottage industry that the state has on the state statute. So would there be any preference or a distinction between having those? I think the feedback we received is specific to what we're growing and then selling, but would you want to have any distinction between having those cottage industry, those packaged foods produced on site, or now we're saying, okay, neighbor B makes jam and I'm gonna sell neighbor B's jam, which is kind of a slightly different context. So just wanna throw that out there for discussion with the commission.
I'm not offended by that at all. I think the same thing applies to me. As long as we're not having big traffic jam, you know, scary safety situation, lovely, great.
Agreed.
I agree.
I agree.
I think it supports our residents in their skills, in their creativity, in their, I'm a big proponent of urban farming, and if we can enhance and encourage that, we'll all be a little healthier.
Did I read on there that the foods was like limited to not an animal byproduct?
Right. You can't do eggs, so.
Yeah,
Or meat.
I think that is the regulations of the cottage industry, that there's restrictions and it can't be animal products.
Shelf stable, I think is what it says, so, okay.
Did I read in the early draft, this excludes food prep or a food truck?
Yeah, food trucks would not be included in
Food truck
this.
would be something different, right?
It's a good question, though.
Yeah, and I had noticed that in the example we had from the Salt Lake Code, the food preparation is prohibited, and I wondered if that's something we needed to specify or if it was clear enough in the definition of a food stand.
Yeah, and I think the cottage industry has those specific
Has that covered.
details, which is why we're saying that it's regulated by that cottage food industry in the state code.
Okay.
I just had some questions about maybe the definition of the temporary status of it. I wondered if like just the term seasonal would define the temporary on there, or would it just be like ever revolving? So we've got flowers in stock and then we're going to do, I don't know, honey or et cetera?
If I may, we did, as one of the other discussion points, we did have a slide for the duration, and essentially the options we were intending to present were 180 days consecutively, which would amount to roughly 6 months, as opposed to 240 days consecutively, which, based on our conversation with the applicant, would essentially accommodate both warm and cool weather crops. But she didn't express a strong preference for 240 versus 180. It was just, in thinking of other potential farmers, she wanted to make sure that that was the consideration we took into account.
Yeah, I would encourage the option B, just so you can have more seasons. We have other seasons, so.
Yes, I think just as kind of an additional note, part of the kind of context for the 180 days comes from our home occupation code for temporary uses. It's a similar time frame provided, and so I think the staff recommendation comes from this idea that as a temporary use, 180 days is more in line with something seasonal as opposed to 240, which is 8 months of the year and would be less temporary.
Well, it begs the question, what's temporary? If you're majority of the calendar year, city I worked in, we had 120. Because of some sensitivity with some local retailers who are like, hey, that fruit stand's there most of the year. You know, that's not temporary. So, you know, you're always trying to balance needs and stuff, but I think it shouldn't be more than 180, and I think it'd be better if it's actually less, but I don't know. Are there, asking the applicant, honestly, are there stands that operate literally 6 months out of the year? I've never seen one.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
for sure. So my thought with the 180 days would be if I opened for Mother's Day with my flowers, then I could go until October 20th. Like I could do Mother's Day flowers and then the rest of my dahlias before they're
Okay.
dead. The thought with the 240, I don't think I wouldn't need 240 days. I'm just thinking, like, what if a farmer is growing spinach in March and pumpkins in October? But we kind of discussed, like, this is temporary, so maybe they have to pick. Like, maybe that farmer focuses on pumpkins and they have to start later, or another farmer focuses on spinach and they
Yeah.
start earlier. And
Well, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Based on that, I think
Honestly,
180
Mother's
is
Day
fine.
through October is inclusive of 180 days.
so,
So I'm
yeah,
not doing the calendaring in my head, but I'd
Well-
say that's pretty
Well,
reasonable.
what about Halloween?
it's like
If you-
May 10th or whatever, May 11th to like October 11th would be like after the first frost. So kind of, that's the growing season. First and last frost and first frost in our area is 180 days out.
Yeah, and again, we do feel like we need to define what this temporary time period is. It's very problematic when we go to our code and there's not definitions and there's not explanations of that. So we're trying to learn from the inefficiencies or the insufficiencies that our code currently has. Again, the 180 days was consistent with some of the information in our business licensing regulation, and then wanting to just come to the commission, of course, with a place of being conservative and being respectful to, once more, that this is going to be happening within neighborhoods. And so is that something that, you know, neighbors may tire of after 6 months and 8 months is too much? And that's something that we certainly want to be sensitive to. So I'm seeing head nods from the commissioners, but I'll just let you have that discussion.
So it says consecutive days. So
Yeah, that's problematic.
how long between not being open is considered non-consecutive?
Well, so in my mind, the way we would look at regulating that is if you started March 1st, you would have to be done 180 days later. So if you only had March 1st and did July, it's not the operation of the stand that would be consecutive, it's from start to finish that would be consecutive.
So if the stand is up it's running. If you are closed on Sundays, that's not a break in your
It's not a reset.
consecutive days.
Correct.
Correct, yeah, that's how the intent was with writing this.
I mean, I might have to say something like 180-day window. It can't operate for more than a 180-day window of time in a calendar year or something.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
We could also specify, in terms of consecutive months, if that's more clear in terms of the intent of what we're proposing.
Or just fix it on the annual calendar. It's April 15th to October 15th, or
Well,
period.
I like the flexibility because, for flower growers, a certain window might work, but if I grow pumpkins, I might want a slightly
Right.
later window or something. so-
Yeah, no, make the window however you want it, but then stick to it, is what I'm saying.
You're
I-
saying when they do their conditional use, they say, this is my window?
Well, no, I think the windows should be consistent throughout the city. Whatever it should be in code. Are you gonna have a separate conditional use permit for every stand? So theirs could be February to September? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's,
That makes sense, okay, yeah. Flexibility's a good thing. Except
So-
when it comes to enforcement.
So am I hearing from the commission that there's a preference for changing the consecutive days to a different time period? Or are we comfortable with the current phrasing?
Well, I think prior to answering that, we should look at how, the length of time that you're comfortable with. And if, Commissioner Allred, 120 days, that is, I think, a very common temporary
Yep.
standard as
Yep.
well. So if we're wanting to say you have 120 days or 240 or 180, I think if we can get consensus from the commission on that, and then we can work to define, to create the intent behind that window.
Would it work to say something like 25 weeks? 25 consecutive weeks? Because then that really kind of implies they don't have to be open every day. They just have to be open sometime each week.
Does that open, though, that you can say, well, I was closed on Monday through Thursday?
Yeah.
I still have extra
Yeah.
time.
I think just the concern I'm hearing is that no one gets cute without 180 days calculated, and we can let the attorneys
Yeah.
give us some claw words in there that, from commencement or opening or permitting, we can figure that out. But as staff has requested, are we comfortable with the 180 timeframe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna type some stuff out here for a second.
that's fine. I'd actually like to kind of pause this right here, remembering that this is a public hearing item, and our pattern is usually to open that up to the public kind of early in the period. So I'd like to do that right now, if we could. We'll let you sit down, and we'll open up the public hearing for this agenda item. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this item, now is your opportunity to come forward. Just want to make sure that we do that.
There's a stampede.
Okay. Come on up, just state your name and,
My name is John Lassane. I recently graduated from the planning program at the U, along with my peer over here. I'm friends with Mr. Allred over there. And I just thought that the phrase like interval, you could say like 180-day interval, could be a useful wording, but that's all I got.
Thank you.
That's not bad, though. That's a good idea.
all right, anyone else? We'll go ahead and close the public hearing portion of this discussion and throw it back to the commission.
All right, with the public hearing closed, can I suggest that we move on to one of the other discussion points, I believe? One of the other points I wanted to touch on was relating to signage and the provisions that would allow for farm stands. The idea being that for similar uses like major home occupations, we don't generally allow signage. But in discussing with the applicant and kind of considering what options might be available, we came up with option A and option B, where option A would allow temporary signage not to exceed 15 square feet. So that would essentially encompass a 5x3 sign that would be allowed to be placed within 25 feet of the farm stand, with the understanding that the sign would be removed at the end of operating hours that day and then could be put back up the next day. Alternatively, option B, while permanent signs wouldn't be allowed regardless, option B would also prohibit temporary signage. So I'd like to open that up to the commission to discuss as far as what they feel would be more appropriate.
I have a suggestion, or a question. What about illumination of temporary signs?
In my experience, I've not seen a lot of temporary signage that is illuminated. In discussion with the applicant, we were thinking, at least in discussing with her, the A-frame kind of menu signs that you see restaurants put out on occasion, and her thought was to have that in front of her farm stand with maybe, what she was selling at the time, to allow for people to understand that she was open and available for business without creating any permanent signage that would potentially cause issues.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because I think with a temporary use, unlike a regular commercial business that has usually a professional sign done that's illuminated and regulated, I would suggest that we probably shouldn't have, do we have a rule on illumination of temporary signs? Because if we don't, we
have
ought to.
temporary sign regulation at all.
Okay, then I would suggest that as part of this, that we have non-illumination of those, because they might set up something that's way too bright or not lighting up. Somebody's going to slam on the brakes.
I'd be fine
just-
with no illumination, but
Maybe just stay
have
away from illumination.
have a temporary sign allowed.
Yes, I like the
Yeah.
allowance, I like the location, I like the size, but illumination worries me a bit.
But I wonder if I rarely see farm stands. I don't know if I can ever think of a farm stand that I saw open at night. And
And it's
then we look at our
prohibited.
regulation, or our proposed regulation here, it says they can't operate before dawn or after dusk. So there wouldn't be any need for illumination if they have a sign, other than if they just want to advertise when they're not there,
Yeah,
which
yes.
may be possible.
Right,
Yeah.
to say, hey, I may not be there, but man, I can have the sign, I can have light on
Yeah,
that. So they'll
that's a
come
good
back the
point.
next day, and I think that's not a good idea.
I believe bullet point A gets us most of the way there. Farm stands
Yeah.
may not operate
Yep.
before dawn or after dusk, including setup and takedown time,
Yep.
including any temporary signage erected.
Correct.
Or words to that
Yep.
effect, then I'm closed.
Yeah, the draft ordinance was not including signage as an allowance, and so if we want to allow that, then we could certainly work that into the regulations that the illumination of signage wouldn't be allowed, and I
Yeah.
think it should be taken down when it's outside of operating hours.
I agree, I like
I like
that.
that.
I think that's ideal.
Yeah.
15 square feet,
Perfect.
non-illuminated, temporary sign taken down daily.
Thank you. If commissioners are comfortable, I'd like to move on to one of our other discussion points. We've touched on this a little bit already. As far as zones where farm stands would be allowed, staff is proposing that these would be allowed as a conditional use in our lower density residential areas and agricultural zones, and they wouldn't be allowed in our higher density residential, such as, R2 or R4, with the idea that, as the concept of a farm stand wouldn't mesh well with the kind of neighborhood you would see in higher density, whereas in our lower density, people would be able to have that required setback from the right-of-way, and it'd be a little bit more in line with the residential character. So the zone allowance essentially just excludes those higher density residential areas, and that would be staff's recommendation.
The only exception, or not, the thing I could see there is that even in R2, R4 zones, we may have single-family residential lots, or we may have large pieces of property that are not developed yet. And they may still be growing stuff on that property.
would we want to include a provision specific to those higher density residential areas then to allow for that, or just permit it as a conditional use in those zones as well?
I'd just permit it as,
I would.
Would they be able to comply with like the setback and the
Yeah.
minimum,
sure,
even in the higher density?
all of that mhm,
Yeah.
would still apply.
So like, if they can't comply, then it's a no-go, but
Then that's an enforcement issue, right?
Yeah,
And just thinking out loud, right, but in RM, and I'm guessing it would be this, could be the same in R2 and R4, but usually the open space is commonly owned. And so in that instance, obviously they would have to have permission, if there's an owners association, they would have to have permission to have the farm stand located there, which we certainly can do, and just thinking out loud, and it would just be a little bit more complicated versus just the straightforward of, you know, I own the property or I'm the legal renter, leasee of the property.
If I read this correctly, all of these uses are permitted conditionally. So in the example that you gave where it's an empty lot in one of those zones, we'd have an opportunity to look at the feasibility. Okay.
And just another thought too is that so little of our community is zoned anything but R1 or ag. You know, that it's just another consideration.
We'll hit on exactly what I was going to say, and that is, once you start getting to the zoning of it, there's always an outlier, it seems like. There's always a property that's bigger than the zone, it was never developed or whatever. So then you run into a problem where somebody may have ample space to grow stuff and to put it out there and do a stand. But if you say you can't do it in those zones, then that's not a reasonable standard. So I think you just.
Well, there's always an option for somebody to submit a text amendment and ask for the zone to be included, which is essentially why we're here this evening, so.
So you're suggesting that we keep the multiple family zones in there as a prohibition?
Well, so no, I'm just saying if we only ended up including the ag and the R1 zones as presented, then if it came up in the future, that another zone wanted to be an option, a resident or whoever could submit for that text amendment. So, and obviously this is the prerogative of the Planning Commission, but understanding that this is a new introduction of a new use, we also felt like starting a little bit more conservatively would be a better place. But again, if the commission as a whole wants us to look at including the R2, R4, and the RM zones, then I think we can easily adapt that.
Just as a point of clarification here, now that we're discussing this, just thinking about our RM zone and the requirement for those projects usually to have a development agreement, would there need to be a provision for any projects in that zone to then additionally allow those, or would it be, I guess Melinda, maybe, I don't know
Yeah.
if that's.
No, I think that's a good question, but I think, you know, when we do development agreements, it's for the entitlement, and then afterwards, usually the rest of the zoning is just handled through what's permitted with the conditional and the permitted uses. So I don't think that would be a barrier or something that we would have to consider going forward.
Thank you. So it sounds like the commission is leaning towards the more flexible allowance for outside of just single-family zones. As just kind of moving forward, there are two more discussion points I wanted to hit. Thank you again for your patience. So the other one, one of the other ones is owner presence on site. So in discussing this, the idea would be option A would require essentially that during the hours of operation, as, you know, provided in the ordinance, the owner of the property or legal occupant who's running the farm stand would be required to be on site during those operating hours, whereas option B essentially gives a little flexibility with the idea that, you know, if the applicant needed to take her kids to the park or run a quick errand, that as long as there was contact information provided on site, that would be permissible and wouldn't be a violation of the ordinance. And so I'd like to open that up to the commission to hear your thoughts.
So the argument that I could see to just allow for a phone number is that I've seen some farm stands that work on the honor system.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
You
and
know,
that was, I
agree.
believe, what our applicant had intended to do as well. That was her interest.
Yeah. And
Probably
in that
don't.
case, you know, you just have a phone number there and nobody, and that seems to work pretty well, I think.
I think A is too restricted.
Not with eggs anymore.
I mean, you
Yeah.
can't go on vacation, you can't do anything.
Well, and
Gotta
that
be
turns
there.
them into a full-time shopkeeper where they may be growing flowers or taking care of their family or whatever, and I think that's nice.
What if they wanted like a family member to take that responsibility on?
Right.
It's like, you know, if they have older kids that wanted to run the stand or something like that, does that limit it with that option A?
Right.
Our definition, it goes back to, right, and again, we want to be sensitive to the fact that this is a neighborhood, but the definition is saying that it's the farm stand has to be operated by the owner or legal occupant. And so, you know, I mean, frankly, I don't think this is a situation where we want somebody to go on vacation for a week and have somebody else come in and operate the farm stand. That's just, in my mind, not the, I mean, it's not how our other home occupations are set up, and obviously this is a somewhat different situation here, but we wanted to ensure that there was some type of accountability if there was an issue, if there was a concern. I think leaving things unattended for long periods of time, especially if there is nobody there on the site, could lead to issues with theft and other types of concerns of vandalism. So the notion, right, like most of our home occupations don't allow for outside employees to come in. And so we could do this differently, but that was the thought with how we presented this.
So the idea is if you say you're out of town, your stand is closed, kind of like that. But I'm meaning more like, say she wants her child to go out there and learn some entrepreneurship.
So legal occupant should count for your family, your household. So if the kids
Right.
are running the stand, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
As long as she's
Yeah,
on,
but if
on
it's
the
your,
ground,
if
like
it's your
up there.
mother-in-law from Farmington, that would not be the owner or the legal occupant.
Okay.
And then Mindy just pulled up our major home occupation B, which those are the ones that the planning commission sees. Those are the ones that come to this meeting for conditional use permits, but it says the use shall be conducted primarily within the dwelling and carried on by the inhabitants thereof and no others. So again, we're trying to aim for some consistency, right? Because we do have people come and say, well, why is my neighbor allowed to do this? And I was told I couldn't do this. Sometimes we're not comparing the same things, but this would provide consistency based on our other home occupations, which essentially I feel like this farm stand option here is another version of a home occupation.
But I think would that allow for children, so if her children wanted to run it, then they could be out there doing that.
Okay.
Which put them to work. Absolutely.
That in mind, I think we can move on to our final item of discussion before we open it up to just general questions and discussion with the commission. Kind of circling back to what we had discussed a little bit in terms of the definition, looking at packaged goods, we wanted to give the commission the option to kind of weigh whether packaged goods would be allowed to be produced exclusively on site or in close proximity. I think with what I heard in the prior discussion, the commission would be comfortable with other goods from other sites being brought to the farm stand to be sold, and that wouldn't be objectionable. But if the commissioners have any further thoughts, I'd appreciate them. exclusive to packaged goods, knowing that these would be regulated in accordance with the cottage food operations law that we mentioned earlier.
Right.
So we had talked about agricultural produce from anywhere in Kaysville. Probably,
Correct.
I would lean probably towards packaged goods produced in Kaysville as well.
Yeah.
That gets to the idea of somebody who's selling flowers,
Local.
and their neighbor has beehives and says, hey, I'd like to sell some of my, my honey in your beehive, you know, or in your farm stand. That could well work, I think.
And I think that would, be consistent with what we had discussed with the crops. For both packaged food and crops, it would be the same
Yeah.
standard. So we can definitely amend what we have to include that. But it sounds like the commission is open to the concept of allowing goods from within Kaysville City to be sold according with those packaged food regulations. All right. So that was kind of the major points I wanted to hit in terms of kind of the substance of the proposed ordinance. If the commission would like to kind of hit any other kind of major potential sticking points or ask the applicant further questions, I'll open it up now, and I'm also happy to answer questions as needed too.
I had one more question about the temporary of the stand. Do we want to be able to define that? Does that mean that the stand has to be disassembled when it's not in use?
So under duration, I believe we stipulate that, I'm not sure which section it is, sorry. But we
17?
stipulate that it has to be taken down at the end of each day.
The entire stand does?
Yes.
Just the products.
Oh, just the product. Oh, okay.
That's what I'm
By-
looking at.
Thank you. Yeah, so, farm stand
Right.
products shall be removed from the farm stand location
Yeah.
outside the hours of operation. And that protects, again, the area from vandalism and theft, and also protects the farm stand operator from having products stolen. So that would require, if we are having this hours of operation allowed between dusk and dawn, that when it's sunset, they take everything down and put it away.
But
I-
the stand may remain.
The stand
Yeah,
can stay.
if there's a pop-up tent or a table, I think that's fine to remain out there, but we want to, protect the community from an invitation for theft, especially in those dark hours when
Yeah,
people
sure.
are not awake and around and active.
Would we allow any kind of a permanent structure, though? Like if she's just going to be there for 180
No,
days?
and I don't think we should allow any permanent structures. In fact, I believe the code says that no
Yeah.
permanent structures
Right.
are allowed.
So it should-
We don't
5-7.
allow, I mean, we don't allow, my thought is most of this is going to be conducted in the front yards of people. We have setback requirements. We don't want to start constructing permanent structures and trying to figure out how that fits into setbacks. It needs to be a non-permanent structure.
Where does it show what the setbacks are?
It's 10
So under lot area restrictions, there's the stipulation of that 10 feet back from the property line, from adjacent property lines, and then also from the right-of-way.
So, okay, what would the property line generally be? Is that the street?
Generally speaking, the property line generally starts about a foot back from the sidewalk. So if they were a foot back from the sidewalk, then it would be additional 10 feet. And that can vary slightly depending on the width of the sidewalk. My understanding is some sidewalks are 4 feet, some are 5. You would obviously need to be aware of that in complying with these regulations, but generally speaking, it's 10 feet.
So just to say then, the restriction is basically they can set up something that's temporary, that it can be taken down, but it doesn't have to be taken down every night, just as long as the product is removed.
Correct.
And it cannot go past the 180 to 40 operating days.
Yeah, whatever the commission lands on in the end, we do feel like there needs to be some type of defined start and stop or duration of what that temporary use is.
And did we include a red line that the takedown each day included the signage?
We had said that, yeah, did we add that to
We
the?
discussed it.
I made a
Text.
note of that, if we want to
Yes.
allow signage, that we would include that, because I think that's, I think that would be, the whole reason why you would want temporary signage is so that it could be moved. So,
Mhm.
And
I don't,
it addresses Commissioner Allred's concern about lighted signs all night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, so on the signage, which I think we did have consensus of head nods, I just wrote down the notes of, now I gotta put my glasses back on. No lighting on signs, removed when it's not operating, and up to 15 square feet. Okay. And we would just, probably just create a new section here that would just say signage. There, I think there is a part in here under the prohibited that says signage is prohibited, so we would remove this, and then add a portion, or just, signage. So we would do 15 square feet, no lighting. Yeah, removed outside of operating hours.
So I just keep imagining the Beetlejuice sign with the arrow. So sorry, your dreams of having that lighted arrow to your stand, it's no go.
That's just me getting old.
This is very hard to type when people's heads are in the way, Mindy. Thank you. I know. It's, yeah, so easy fix is for Melinda to just scroll up. But I think we did reach general consensus on the signage, and so I think this represents what the group discussed. We would just add another section in that says signage is allowed. It has to be 15 square, can't be more than 15 square feet. There also was a provision in what Britt submitted that it be within 25 feet of that stand, which is probably, I think, a smart thing to not have that 100 feet away. I don't know what the commission thinks about that, but no lighting, 15 square feet, and removed outside of the operating hours.
I have a question for staff on the signage. I'm not trying to be too much of a stickler here, but one of the big problems that I've seen with these temporary stands is that they stick the sign out in the right-of-way. Do we want to specifically say, add that, it may not be in the right-of-way, must be set back, or does that just go without saying because you can't put it in the right-of-way?
We do have a general sign provision that prohibits signs in the right of way. I don't think that specifies permanent versus temporary,
Yeah.
but we can add that in addition.
I mean, it's just typing, but it sends a message that you cannot stick your, because the stand is back, 15 feet. They're not going to put themselves out by the road, but they'll put that sign right out on the edge of the travel lane. I think we should be clear about that. Must be out of the right of way.
Also, always makes our job more, easier to do with additional details like that. So I think we could absolutely just add that in. And I just threw 5 feet from the property line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's fine.
I like it.
Okay.
Where did we land on zoning?
From my understanding, the commission was comfortable with it being conditional use in all residential and agricultural zones.
Right.
Okay. Good.
Okay, so I think maybe for the purposes of the next part of the discussion, we can just scroll through the ordinance and each part. So I think we got the definition there that we're okay with anything within Kaysville City. We'll add in R2, R4, and RM. We did make a recommendation change of this for ourselves to just say legal occupant of the site of the parcel. The site just felt maybe a little bit too nebulous. Parcels, a more common terminology. We talked about allowing that flexibility for just providing contact information. We had the contiguous parcels. Let's see. So the farm stand, single site could be considered as contiguous parcels. Okay, I think that one is okay unless the commission has any questions about this particular section. So I think duration needs probably a little bit more discussion. I don't know if there was a real
I would feel
conclusion of the
comfortable with
discussion.
180 days, kind of based on our discussion, but I wouldn't want to limit that. Beyond that, that's just my opinion.
180.
Yeah, I agree,
No
180.
more than 180, I just think.
And that makes it fun, seasonal. It's not like a constant thing we're dealing with all the time, but it gives you a lot of usable months. I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so for this, the commission wanted to seek a little bit more clarification in how we defined that consecutive time period. So, I mean, I threw up some language on the screen, but if this works and the commission is satisfied with that, we could go with that. I would also recommend that we, even at that, we would take this back to our city attorney and just kind of think through that a little bit more. And if there's a little more finessing, we could do that in between taking this to the, whatever recommendation comes from here this evening in city council. But I think that addresses that.
I like that language.
How do we know when they're going to start their 180 days, though? Is there something about that?
So we did include in, actually, I'll let Ann answer that with the application materials.
Right, as part of the conditional use application, they would be required, in addition to the site plan, to provide us with the information of when they would stop and start operations so that we had that on record and could enforce as necessary.
Nice. You're not leaving it up to the neighbors to count.
No.
That's nice.
Although
Well,
I'm
there-
sure they would tell us if
Some will,
they
yeah.
thought
There
it was
will
out
be
of line.
some neighbors that will absolutely
Yes, there will.
count.
Yes, there will. Yeah.
So this removal of item C is just to allow for this new section that we'll add in for the signage. We did also want to just, based on other issues that we see, right, we want to make sure that, like, Christmas tree sales seems a little intrusive for a residential area, so and those are regulated under a different portion of the code, so we wanted to put that in there just so that there was no room for argument if somebody wanted to do that.
Seems like we recently addressed Christmas tree stands.
Yep, we did. And fireworks.
Are we consistent with our language? We say farm stand here. Is this whole section entitled farm stands? For some reason, I'm thinking of this as temporary use.
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's
farm stand
it's
throughout.
farm
Okay,
stands,
okay,
yeah.
good.
Farm stands. I mean, I suppose that
No, I like the language.
that seasonal farm stands, we could probably get rid of seasonal because we're defining what that is, and we just put farm stands are prohibited in the public right of way. We do often have people that go and throw a table and chairs and a pop-up tent out on a sidewalk or on property that is very clear they don't have permission to do that, or it's in the right of way. So this gives us a little more leverage for those situations that we come back and say they're not allowed in the public right of way.
Yeah.
This doesn't like prohibit our like little lemonade stands, though. Does this cause problems for them?
No.
They're not farm
They
stands.
don't have to come in for a conditional use permit to sell their cookies on a day or a thing.
If we do that, we'll be on the news.
Those are considered, the city, we have an ordinance for that. It's a youth enterprise license, and so it's not a license, but it's a youth.
Oh, that's cool.
They have some leeway to do that.
So 17 and younger, and it establishes how much room they can use. It's got to be set up, set down, or taken down, signage, all of that. So it allows for
Okay,
a young
good.
entrepreneur
Good.
to do that, but it does.
Well, it's a nice acronym too, YELL. Youth enterprise license, yeah.
It sounds very regal, doesn't it?
like that. I like
It's
that.
right, yeah.
Yeah, that's in our home occupation, under our youth
Oh, yeah.
enterprise.
Look at
So, we did, and I do want to say, I really appreciated both of my staff, Mindy and Ann, especially with this process of really trying to be thorough and talking through business licensing regulations, not wanting to create any issues there, and also not wanting to be consistent with our existing home occupations, and being sensitive, yes, to we don't want to take away an opportunity for those youth enterprises. So I think we've done a very thorough job with that.
Nice.
Well done.
Job.
Good.
So that said, maybe we go through this
Did
one
we-
more time to just kind of make sure it's where the commission is wanting it to be. We would also need to go through and we would need to add in the additional zones down at the end of this chapter for the R2, R4, and RM. I think
We cover it all?
I think we have, so, let's just go through that one last time, and then when, there's ready for motion, I think we'll be able to address that. So, again, the temporary, we're defining farm stand as temporary retail sales of food crops and ornamental crops and packaged goods with the cottage industries produced within Kaysville. We've added those additional zones, allowing for that flexibility with that mobile home or mobile phone contact information. Defining that, yes, we're okay with 180 days and when that starts and ends. So, and I'm thinking out loud here, but we could even say like that, let's see, the word's not coming to mind, but those non-consecutive days, you know, if you operate Monday through Thursday,
Yeah.
that doesn't start a clock over, so the non
I think it's clear the way you have it.
okay.
Day one of operation and,
Okay.
but,
Includes
but,
180
but I,
days later.
but I'm fine with running that past.
I'm gonna give myself a pat on the
Legal, if
back
you
for
want.
drafting that on the fly
Yeah.
then.
As you should.
Good job.
You should ask for a raise, Melinda.
I'm going to, the council will deny it, but thank you. Let's see. Okay, so we've got, this is the signage. Again, I think we've got that covered well, and then this jumps back into those zones. So I think, good job. This has been a good discussion. With that, though, not to take over Chair Packer's, but any other thoughts from the applicant? Anything else that we're missing
done
or
well?
anything?
Are you happy with? I'm so happy. Thank you guys. So I'm really grateful.
Oh, then we've done a good job.
The staff for all their work. This has been very thorough for my little page of like, this is my idea to.
Just a question I'd have for the commissioners and for Ann and Melinda. Are we comfortable moving forward with this, or do we want to see the language again? With, I mean, I thought it's pretty clear, everything that we talked about here, and if they make the changes. But if we want to see it again too, I think that's fine.
I think we allow them to make the changes and move it forward.
I'm
Okay.
comfortable with moving.
Yeah.
forward.
I'm
For me, I'm
confident
very
that staff
comfortable.
can encapsulate what we've discussed, but it's a good question, though.
Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah.
move forward with it.
With the addition of the other zones, the language of the recommendation that's marked both page 3 of 3 and page 10 of 23.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the enactment of 17-31-5 farm stands with the red lines as discussed.
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion?
No, that sounds good. And I think we move it forward onto the council, and it doesn't have to come back here again.
All right, we'll start the voting here.
Aye.
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 Motion passes.
Did you second, Wilf?
No.
Paul seconded? Was it
I
Paul,
did.
or was it?
Okay.
I'll second.
This was great work, and I want to thank our applicant as well. Like, I love it when the citizens come forward with something and jump right in. It's fantastic to see in our community.
To staff, thank you for improving upon what little old Salt Lake City would propose. No, I think we've definitely got a better ordinance now.
Thank you.
Well, one of the board members for the Utah Cut Flower Association was hoping this could be a model ordinance for everyone else. So
Really?
we may be well on our way to that,
Well, that would be
as
good.
long as this gets through the city council.
I think it enriches the community for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, put that in the minutes that this is now a model ordinance once being sent to
You're
the
going to be on the news.
council. Excellent. All right, let's see where we at. Approval of minutes from January 23rd, 2025, Planning Commission meeting.
Can I move to approve? Or does there need to be discussion?
No,
Now we can,
you can go ahead and go for it.
we have a second?
Oh, I'll second.
All right, group vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstained, I have to abstain. Wasn't here.
Excellent, thank you. All right, item number 7, other matters properly come before the Planning Commission. Are there any matters?
Yeah, we will not have any rezones or text amendments for our next planning commission meeting, which I think would be the 27th. So, and as of now, we have not received any conditional use permits. So there's a chance we may all get the night off, if no conditional use permits come in.
That subdivision that you had sent out the notice on.
So
this.
those do not come
They
to
don't
the
come here.
commission, anymore. So that's
Yeah.
just more of a nicety. We're allowing the public to comment and put that information out there. The public comment period will, I think we put it concludes on Monday, which is a holiday, but we'll pick that sign up on Tuesday. We have not received any comments on that, other than I think a couple of questions about people want to know what's going in there,
Yeah.
but we don't know yet.
Yeah.
The internet thinks it knows.
The what?
Well, I saw on Facebook one of the lots, they said it's going to be a Starbucks. I have no idea where the information came from, but.
Which
So-
property are we talking about?
Annie's.
And,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
and we know the internet is always
It's always
accurate.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, those are chickens you count when,
Right.
when the building permit is issued. But I think that the developer has had conversations with Starbucks. Whether or not that's what will end up going there,
yeah, that's.
anyone's
Speculative.
guess. We did have a town hall meeting last night for the community reinvestment area. My guess would be there's probably 80 people or so that was there. We had a couple commissioners there last night. And I believe this will be that the agenda will be posted tomorrow, but the council has directed staff to put that on as a work item for discussion. And I will be out of town next week and hopefully in the middle of nowhere without a cell phone signal. So I don't know what will happen with that, but the public is given feedback to the council, and I think they're trying to be responsive. So that will be on the agenda next week. I think that's really everything that I had, other than I want to see if it would be okay if Commissioner Summercorn might want to give an update on some of the land use bills that are out with the legislation right now. I'm actually trying to ignore some of that just because it gets really overwhelming. it'd be interesting to, I don't know if there's any information that the league has put forward on how many of those bills are land use, but it feels to me like 80% of them are. I know it's not really that high, but it sure
It is.
feels that way, which is
I'm tracking 37 bills. at this
37.
point. A lot of.
400.
Well, out of like 500 something now.
Number 38.
Mindy math.
There are several, what you would call, I guess, major land use bills. Those are the ones that the Land Use Task Force and the Commission on Housing Affordability worked on. And those are moving forward. They're there, they're getting the attention, they're getting the support. There are some other bills, a number of other bills that have popped up that really, in a lot of ways, nobody knew were coming. And most of those probably will not go through. Some of them will. There's one in particular that just popped out of nowhere. It has to do with the requirement that schools, school districts, when they build new buildings, they have to comply with local regulations. Not all of them, but there's some exceptions in there. But this bill would say that they don't have to comply with the setback, height, bulk, parking, and other requirements. I'm sure there's a backstory to it, but I don't know what it is. Somebody told me they thought it was in Draper, but then the bill was amended recently and is made to apply only to first-class cities now. So that doesn't include Draper, so it must have been someplace else. But that one's moving very fast, so it obviously has some support for something. But many of the others probably won't succeed. But the major land use bills are pretty substantial. The one that was in public hearing today is over 7,000 lines long and handles a lot of stuff. Cameron Deal from the league had a chart. It was like a wagon wheel, and it showed all the different things that this bill addresses. But a good part of that bill, about 3,000 lines, is a bill that I worked on annexation. And it really isn't anything new. It's just a kind of a cleanup of the annexation code. So that makes it look really long, but still, I mean, if you even discount that, the bill's still 4,000 lines long. So it's a big bill and takes a lot of stuff. And there are several other bills that are kind of, they're not that big, but they're in that category, and they'll move along. And they do all kinds of stuff. It's hard to categorize and say it now.
Sure. So I think some of the most common topics that we've seen, at least here, or questions, have been detached accessory dwelling units. I think there is a bill out there that would allow those to be permitted in cities' first and second class counties. Is that what that is?
Yeah, you're talking about external?
Yes.
Yeah,
detached.
that bill's dead.
Oh, it's dead.
That bill's pretty well done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's bad.
There's a lot of residents in Kaysville that just got sad.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sad.
And then the bill that would have just allowed single family to be permitted as 6,000 square foot lots.
Yeah, and that bill's dead too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think
Primarily because the sponsor of those bills just kind of put them out there on his own
without going through the,
and didn't work with the other groups. And
yeah. So for those of you who not may be familiar, but the state has this land use task force that really is kind of the, I guess, the cooperative way of getting bills and issues and topics discussed. And so what Commissioner Summercourt is saying is that when these bills are coming through outside of that commonly accepted practice, they're not being welcomed with open arms. And so that's good, right? Because we want to have those thoughtful discussions. And so I'm glad to hear that. There's also a bill, I participated in a committee, a committee meeting on Monday about the billboards, and
that bill's up for hearing tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay. So billboards have special protections under land use code, and essentially these protections In this current bill, they're looking to, I think, expand,
It's not expand, it's relocate.
expand the relocation opportunities that may come from, or that would come from UDOT projects.
Yeah, if there's any expansion of the interstate or a state highway that results in having to remove a billboard, that billboard right now has the right to relocate within a mile of that location. And there are some other parameters that it have to meet, like it has to be in a commercial or a industrial zone, and it has to have the approval of the local jurisdiction. If the local jurisdiction doesn't approve it, they have to buy it, which is an interesting
Yeah, kiss that guy.
aspect of it. But this bill would basically take away that distance limitation and allow them as it's written right now, anywhere on that highway. So if you're losing a billboard on I-15 somewhere, you could conceivably relocate it anywhere on I-15.
As long as
It meets those parameters.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
Is that the Bill Reagan bill?
Yes.
we don't have any billboards in Kaysville,
No.
so,
And that was a concern that was expressed by one of our council members who was at the meeting saying, if they can locate it anywhere, does that mean they can put it in our city? And the
even though
answer
we
to
don't
that-
even have one, yeah.
And the answer to that was, no, it has to have the approval of the city.
Yeah.
So if the city doesn't allow them and doesn't want them, it can't go there.
Well, the city's not, make sure they don't allow.
Well, I think that covers the questions I had, thank you.
Yeah, keep us informed.
Another big one that's coming up tomorrow is the gravel pit bill, which really expands the right of gravel pits to continue and to expand.
Yeah, yeah.
And we fortunately don't have one in the
Yeah,
city, but.
so there's two types of cities in Utah, those that have gravel pits and those that are happy.
Yeah.
Wait, I thought you were going to say those that are going to get one.
Well, no, this is actually, here's your nerd alert, but a very fascinating topic to
Yeah, it
me.
is.
I was the city manager in Pleasant View, and there's a gravel pit at the top of that community that has been there long before probably 99% of the homes were there. And when Legacy Parkway was approved, that gravel pit got the job for the Legacy Highway and started hauling 24/7. The residents didn't care for that, and the city tried to implement regulations and ended up in a lawsuit, and the court came back, said, you can't do that, that's restraint of trade. That lawsuit actually, some portions of it had remained on the books for years while I was there. We managed to get the remaining lawsuit removed, but there's, I think the most interesting, two of the things that I think they're most interesting about those gravel pits is, one, you cannot find those materials just anywhere. They have to come from certain types of layers of the earth. No, I think it's usually the alluvial layers, and that just doesn't exist everywhere.
Right.
And secondly, those, those gravel pits, right, they do have to have special provisions because nobody wants them.
They produce a lot of dust, a lot
Yeah,
of
they
noise.
do. However, the biggest reason why those have to be, I mean, apart from like you can only get those materials in certain locations, if you say, okay, we don't want this here, we don't want that here, and you have to start hauling stuff in from, I don't know, western Wyoming or, eastern Nevada, cost of goods goes up to a point where our infrastructure projects, this impacts asphalt, concrete, the cement, all of your road base fill, the foundation for your homes. It impacts every single part of construction and building essentially. And so there's several communities that have been very active in trying to fight the expansion of those gravel pits. And from the very simplistic terms of, well, you do that, you're going to pay more for everything. And that's not just, that's the price of your home. That's the price of projects that UDOT does, that the county would do, that, a city would do. And so, like I said, there's two types of cities, those that have them and those that are happy. So, but that's a topic that comes up almost every single year at the state legislature as well.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So it'll be interesting. So that one's being heard tomorrow.
I mean, we're kind of at the focus of a perfect storm with regard to that. You know, if you're going to have a lot of growth and construction, you got to have the aggregate. You got to have sand and gravel because that's
Yeah.
just such a key component. And if it comes from a long distance away, it's expensive, and that adds to the cost. And right now, we're all arguing about the cost of housing, you know, and how expensive that is. We are blessed, so to speak, being in an old lake bed here,
Yeah.
which means right along the mountains, especially where some of these creeks and rivers came out, there's a lot of alluvial material deposited there.
All over.
I mean, just, you know, look up South Weaver on Highway 89, and there's several others, a number of others all along here. Point of the Mountains, another big one. The material's here, it's close. That's great, but this also happens to be the place where people are living now and building, and it is not a pleasant type of facility to live near. And so it just sets up a classic battle and challenge, which is really something. I spent a good part of my career as a planner dealing with that. I was in Salt Lake City for 6 years, and I could tell you that I dealt with three major issues while in my 6 years at Salt Lake City. One was homelessness, what was happening with regard to that. The second was billboards. Billboards were a big issue for Salt Lake City. And the third was gravel pits. And what was happening on the north end of Salt Lake City with those gravel pits. So
So the
they're a
bill
big
that's
issue.
coming through, is that like a protective measure for gravel pits, or is it both? Like,
Expansive.
It's-
It's to expand their rights.
It really
Yeah.
expands the gravel pits' rights
Yeah.
to exist, to continue to exist and to expand.
Well, it's a difficult issue from a variety of viewpoints too, because you can also make the argument that those trucks being on roadways is a public safety issue. The farther they have to go, the more, and they're, you know, the big heavy trucks, there's an air quality issue. I mean, there's a lot of little peripheral issues around it, I think, that support the gravel pit expansion or the, you know, allowance of them. I was in Logan the other day. As you come around from Sardine Canyon into Logan, there's a great big one up there on the hillside above Wellsville that has really taken off. And then there's another one, there's another one as you come into the Cache Valley. So I have seen, and there's a new big one up there in Perry, you know, by Brigham City.
Box Elder is probably the most impacted county in the state.
Yeah.
With regard to, there was a study that was done, that was required in a bill last year. And when it shows the amount of aggregate produced per number of residents in the county, Box Elder is way out ahead of everybody
Yeah.
else in the state.
That's where I'm seeing, where they're just popping up new ones. Because there's such a demand. So.
Yep.
If you want to nerd out, read about gravel pits. So,
Give us the update tomorrow after the meeting.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
I think that's everything that I had. Anne or Mindy, is there anything you want to add?
Happy Valentine's tomorrow. We love you guys.
thanks for the little present.
I've got,
On the calendar.
Mr. Chair,
You
I've got
mentioned
one thing.
is the city council meeting on the 20th a work meeting?
They have work session portion and an action
Okay.
portion to every agenda meeting. So, so every city council meeting, they have action items and work items. And so the community reinvestment area, I believe they're going to put on as a work item, which just means they'll be discussing it. They won't take any formal action. Generally, what happens with those items is the motion would be move it to an action item agenda, or they may, which happened at the last council meeting, they said, we want staff to go back and do more work on this and bring it forward, so.
Will they be meeting as a redevelopment agency?
I think they're just going to have a city council meeting.
Okay. Thank
Commissioner Allred, you said yes?
Yeah, just one item. I'd like to, John, can you come up? John introduced himself earlier, but John Lassane and your fellow graduate, are you a graduate? These are two planners, soon-to-be planners. John's out actively trying to get his job, and you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Haechul, and I'm from South Korea.
South Korea, okay.
So I'm also trying to be a future planner in Utah. So so
He's had better luck than me so far. He's had like an internship with Salt Lake County.
last
God.
summer, just only for 3 months.
So John called me up, a couple months ago and said, hey, you said, on LinkedIn, you were mentoring, and I love to mentor. So just want to put a good word in for these two gentlemen here, that they want to get their foot in the door to be planners, and I'm glad they came tonight. John said, can we come to your planning commission? I'm like, yeah, please do, and bring your friend. So if you hear of anything out there in the planning community, let me know, and I'll pass it on to John. And I'm actively looking for him every day. He's interviewing, so anyway. John's a really talented guy, and I don't know you as well, but you's really producing.
I can vouch for him as well. I've worked on him on projects with him in school. So.
Good.
I'll hire you first and then.
Yeah. Anyway, just as a courtesy, that we've got these young planners that want to get in and work for a city and do a good job. So thank
Way
you
to go.
for letting
Best
them.
of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us tonight.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Good luck. Thanks, guys.
All right. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.